In the bustling town of Lakeshore, tucked among serene hills and shimmering lakes, stood a legacy business, a bakery unlike any other. The Silverleaf Bakery was known not only for its delectable pastries and bread, but also for its deep-rooted history, started nearly a century ago by one of the town's founders. Over the years, the bakery had been passed down, generation by generation, until it landed in the hands of Eleanor Stanton. Eleanor was a woman of unyielding strength in her 60s, a tall figure with silver hair and a voice that carried the warmth of a friend and the authority of a leader. She and her husband, George, had taken the bakery from a local gem to a renowned establishment visited by food enthusiasts and locals alike. But 5 years ago, George passed away, and Eleanor found herself running the bakery alone, shouldering both the memories of the past and the pressure of a flourishing business. Lakeshore's townsfolk adored Eleanor, often visiting the bakery not just for the pastries, but to exchange a few words with her. She had an eye for business and a knack for kindness that created an air of respect around her. However, despite her cheerful demeanor and the bakery's success, Eleanor felt the pangs of solitude. She would often recall late nights spent beside the mixing table with George, whispering dreams and sharing plans for the bakery's future. Since his passing, the laughter in her life seemed to have faded, replaced by the quiet hum of machinery and the routine of early morning baking. The bakery remained lively, but for Eleanor, the joy that once accompanied her work had dimmed, leaving her surrounded by familiar walls that now felt hollow. Within the bakery's bustling environment was a young man named Ben. Ben was not a baker. In fact, he wasn't even involved in the food preparation process. He was the janitor, responsible for cleaning up after the bustling work hours and ensuring that the bakery shone each morning. Ben, a soft-spoken man in his late 20s, came to the job without grand ambitions. Life had tossed him a few challenges, leaving him with modest dreams and a quiet resolve. Wearing his worn cap and simple clothes, he was the invisible presence in the bakery. People noticed him just enough to nod a brief hello, but rarely lingered on him. Yet Ben didn't mind. He was content in the quiet role he played, finding comfort in the rhythmic sweeping and mopping, and in the stillness of the bakery when no one else was around. Despite the limited interaction with others, Ben was observant. Through his work, he got to know the staff's routines, their personalities, and even the quirks of the equipment. He saw how Eleanor treated each member of her team with respect, and how she often spent her afternoons at her late husband's desk, gazing thoughtfully out the window. Ben wondered if anyone else noticed her moments of quiet reflection. To him, it was evident that she missed George deeply. Ben himself had lost people he cared about, and, in his own way, understood that kind of loneliness. And though their lives were very different, he felt a small connection to her through that unspoken sorrow. One chilly autumn evening, after finishing his usual tasks, Ben was just about to lock up when Eleanor appeared in the dim hallway. Startled, he quickly removed his cap and nodded politely, waiting to be dismissed as usual. But instead, Eleanor approached him with a softness in her eyes he hadn't seen before. "Ben," she began, her voice gentle but with a tone that hinted at something serious. "I need your help with something important." Ben felt a surge of confusion. Of all the people working in the bakery, why would she need his help? He wasn't trained in any area of the business outside of cleaning, but the sincerity in her eyes held him there, curious yet unsure. "You know I've watched you work here for a while now," Eleanor continued. "You go about your job quietly, but you see things most people overlook. I think you understand more about this place than you let on." Ben blinked, both surprised and somewhat embarrassed. He'd never thought anyone noticed his observations or cared about his quiet presence. "There's a meeting tomorrow with some people interested in the bakery," Eleanor said, her gaze growing thoughtful. "But I can't go in alone. I need someone who knows this place, someone who can keep an eye on things without being distracted by the business talk." Ben looked at her in astonishment, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. Him, a janitor, sitting in on an important business meeting. It seemed almost laughable. "Mrs. Stanton," he stammered, "I'm not sure I'd be any help. I don't know anything about business or what people say in those kinds of meetings. I'm just here to clean up afterward." A small, knowing smile crossed Eleanor's face. "That's exactly why I want you there," she replied, her voice warm yet firm. "You're honest, Ben. I trust you to see things clearly when others are wrapped up in their own agendas." Ben took a deep breath, still baffled by her request. He'd never imagined being part of anything like this. The thought of sitting in a room with suits and formal talk made him feel out of place, like he'd be wearing his work uniform to a black tie event. "But I don't have anything proper to wear," he said, gesturing to his modest clothes and cap. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "That's the least of my concerns, Ben. Just be yourself. I need you to be there, to help me keep an honest eye on things." After a long pause, he finally nodded, still uncertain but moved by her faith in him. "All right," he agreed quietly. "If you think I can help, I'll be there." Eleanor's face softened with gratitude, and a spark of relief brightened her eyes. "Thank you, Ben. This means a lot to me." She patted his shoulder gently before turning back down the hall, leaving Ben standing alone, filled with a strange mix of apprehension and pride. That night, Ben lay awake in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would be significant, not just for Eleanor, but for him as well. Though he'd never been in the spotlight, something about her request made him feel that he was stepping into a moment that could change things. The bakery had been his quiet refuge, a place where he blended into the background. But now, he was being asked to do something different, something bold. The morning air was crisp as Ben walked to the bakery, his nerves twinged with anticipation. He wore his best clothes, which were still modest by anyone's standards, and tried to calm the knot of tension building in his stomach. As he approached the bakery, he noticed Eleanor already waiting for him by the door, looking calm yet determined. She greeted him with a reassuring nod, and together they walked into the building, heading toward the office where the meeting would take place. Inside the small conference room, a team of 3 sat waiting. 2 men in crisp suits and a woman with a poised, unreadable expression. One of the men introduced himself as Jacob, a slick businessman with an air of polished confidence. He'd come to discuss a partnership offer, one that promised growth and expansion for the bakery. Eleanor listened politely, nodding as he spoke, but Ben could see the trace of skepticism in her eyes. The conversation soon grew technical, with terms like revenue projections and equity stakes tossed around. Ben sat quietly beside Eleanor, unsure of much of what was being discussed, but watching closely. As the pitch continued, he began to sense a certain charm to Jacob's words, a calculated smoothness that felt less like an offer and more like a baited trap. Eleanor asked a few questions, but her calm expression remained steady, never revealing her thoughts. Ben's attention drifted to the items on the table in front of Jacob. Among the neatly stacked papers, he noticed a single sheet half hidden beneath a folder. Something about the way it was placed, partially obscured yet within easy reach, struck him as odd. He couldn't explain why, but a gut instinct told him there was more to it than met the eye. His pulse quickened as he realized he might be staring at a crucial piece of information, something that might explain why Eleanor had needed him here. The decision to speak up wasn't easy, but as he glanced at Eleanor, he felt a surge of courage, knowing she'd trusted him for a reason. Taking a deep breath, Ben cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Ben, whose heart pounded in his chest as he felt the weight of their gazes. His voice trembled slightly, yet there was a quiet determination in his tone that even surprised himself. "Excuse me," he began, his hands fidgeting slightly in his lap, "but I couldn't help noticing. There's a paper there, under that folder." He pointed cautiously toward the partially hidden sheet of paper near Jacob. the businessman who had been leading the presentation. For a brief moment, Jacob's smooth facade slipped, and his confident smile wavered. Quickly regaining his composure, he let out a small dismissive chuckle, attempting to brush off Ben's observation. "Oh, that?" Jacob's voice dripped with feigned nonchalance. "It's just an old draft, a document from an earlier proposal. Nothing relevant to today's discussion." He moved his hand to slide the folder over the paper, intending to conceal it further, but Ben noticed a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. Eleanor, however, was watching the exchange closely. She had always trusted her instincts, and they were telling her now that Ben's observation was not something to be dismissed. Her gaze hardened slightly as she looked directly at Jacob. "If it's just an old document, then there should be no problem with showing it to us, should there?" she said calmly, her voice steady but with a steely undertone. Jacob hesitated, visibly uncomfortable, his gaze darting momentarily to his assistant, who sat beside him, furiously scribbling notes but avoiding eye contact with everyone. Clearing his throat, Jacob finally relented, sliding the folder aside and revealing the paper in question. Eleanor reached for it, her fingers holding the document with a firmness that conveyed her authority. As she scanned the page, her usually calm expression darkened, and a subtle fire lit in her eyes. Ben sat silently beside her, feeling his anxiety grow as he observed the tense exchange. He wondered if he had made a mistake, if his instinct had been wrong. But as Eleanor's eyes moved over the words on the paper, a shadow of anger crossed her face, confirming that Ben had been right to speak up. She took a slow, steady breath and looked up, her gaze locking onto Jacob's. "Jacob," Eleanor said, her voice low but filled with restrained intensity. "This isn't just an old document. This is a hidden agreement that would give your company significant control over Silverleaf Bakery's most valued assets and future expansion." Her words hung heavily in the air, and a cold silence followed, filling the room with an uncomfortable tension. Jacob shifted uncomfortably, clearly rattled, but he tried to maintain his composure. "Mrs. Stanton," he began, his voice a strained attempt at smoothness. "You must understand. This agreement was meant to be a preliminary discussion point. We weren't going to bring it up officially until later in our negotiations." But Eleanor's gaze remained unyielding. She could see through the facade, and Ben, observing the exchange, felt a surge of pride. He had been right to trust his instincts, and he realized that his quiet nature had allowed him to see things others might overlook. It was the first time he felt like more than just the janitor. For once, he was an active part of something larger than himself. Sensing he was losing control of the conversation, Jacob adjusted his tone, trying a different approach. "Look," he said, leaning forward slightly, "we're just trying to ensure the best possible growth for Silverleaf. Surely you can see the potential benefits of partnering with us. We're prepared to offer significant resources, something that could take your bakery to new heights." His voice took on a persuasive edge, attempting to reel Eleanor back into his line of thinking. But Eleanor wasn't easily swayed. She placed the document firmly on the table, folding her hands in front of her as she regarded Jacob with a steady gaze. "I have no interest in handing over control of my family's legacy under the guise of growth, Jacob," she said, her voice unwavering. "My husband and I built this bakery from the ground up, nurturing it with love and dedication. I won't allow Silverleaf to become just another acquisition." Ben felt a surge of admiration for Eleanor. Her fierce loyalty to her business, to the memory of her late husband, was palpable, and in that moment, he realized why so many people respected her. She wasn't just a businesswoman. She was a guardian of something meaningful, something deeply personal. Jacob, now visibly unnerved, attempted to regain his footing. "Mrs. Stanton, I understand your attachment to the bakery, but you have to consider the bigger picture," he said, his voice now laced with a touch of frustration. "Partnerships like ours could open doors to markets and resources that would otherwise be inaccessible to a small business like yours. You're turning down a golden opportunity. But Eleanor remained resolute. A golden opportunity that would strip me of the very control that makes this bakery unique. She replied sharply. I'm not interested in diluting the values we've built here just for a chance at a larger profit margin. The assistant next to Jacob fidgeted, casting quick glances at her boss. She seemed to sense the growing tension and subtly gestured to Jacob, as if to advise him to retreat. But Jacob, fueled by his own pride, pushed forward, attempting to sway Eleanor with an argument that he believed would resonate. Imagine, Mrs. Stanton, what your husband would have wanted, Jacob said, his tone taking on a faint sympathy. Wouldn't he have wanted Silverleaf to reach its fullest potential? To honor his legacy by growing beyond the bounds of this small town? Eleanor's eyes narrowed and her face hardened. The audacity of Jacob to invoke her late husband's memory was not lost on her. You don't get to speak for my husband, Jacob, she replied, her voice like steel. George was a man who believed in integrity, in building something meaningful for the community. He would never have sacrificed our values for the sake of a quick expansion. For a moment, the air in the room was thick with tension. Ben could feel the weight of Eleanor's words, and the silence that followed was charged with unspoken defiance. The assistant next to Jacob shifted uncomfortably, her face betraying a hint of unease, while Jacob himself seemed momentarily at a loss, grappling with the realization that his persuasive tactics had failed. In the quiet that followed, Ben felt a sudden surge of courage. Though he was unaccustomed to speaking out in such high-stakes situations, he sensed that Eleanor could use a supportive voice. Gathering his thoughts, he leaned forward slightly, clearing his throat. Mrs. Stanton, Ben said softly, his voice respectful yet firm. I may not know much about business, but I know this place. I know what it means to the community and to everyone who steps inside. This bakery isn't just about profit or expansion. It's about tradition, and it's about people. That's what makes it special. Eleanor looked at Ben, her expression softening as she listened. His words seemed to resonate with her, offering a quiet validation of what she had already believed in her heart. The bakery was indeed more than just a business. It was a legacy, a place filled with memories and values that could never be quantified. Jacob, however, appeared visibly irritated by Ben's interruption. And who are you exactly? He said, a hint of disdain creeping into his voice. A janitor? With all due respect, I'm not sure you're qualified to weigh in on matters like this. But Eleanor's voice cut through Jacob's dismissal, her tone firm and resolute. Ben's voice matters here, Jacob, she said. He understands the heart of this bakery, something that clearly means more than just a balance sheet. Jacob was taken aback, his confident demeanor faltering as he realized that Eleanor's decision was final. The assistant, sensing the impending loss, gently tugged at Jacob's sleeve, signaling for him to back down. With a reluctant sigh, Jacob finally nodded, gathering his papers with a forced, strained smile. Well, Mrs. Stanton, it's clear you have strong convictions, he said, his voice barely masking his frustration. Perhaps there will be a time when you're ready to consider a partnership more seriously. He rose from his seat, his assistant following suit, both of them preparing to leave with thinly veiled disappointment. As Jacob and his assistant exited the room, Eleanor turned to Ben, her face a mixture of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Ben, she said, her voice soft but full of sincerity. You didn't have to speak up, but you did, and it made all the difference. Ben managed a small smile, feeling a warmth spread through him, a sense of belonging he hadn't felt before. I just didn't want to see something important get lost, he murmured, looking down slightly, humbled by her gratitude. With that simple exchange, Ben realized that he wasn't just a janitor. He was part of the bakery's story, a quiet yet essential part of the heart and soul that Eleanor had worked so hard to preserve. The bakery was quiet that evening, bathed in the gentle glow of the golden sunset filtering through the windows. Eleanor and Ben remained in the conference room long after Jacob and his assistant had left, the intensity of the meeting lingering like the last notes of a dramatic symphony. For a moment, neither of them spoke, allowing the silence to settle, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was full of the unspoken gratitude, respect, and trust that had just blossomed between them. Eleanor looked across the table at Ben, and in her gaze was a softness, a vulnerability that she rarely revealed. "Ben," she began, her voice a touch more fragile than before, "you may not realize it, but you changed everything today. I was ready to go into that meeting alone, to face whatever decisions came my way without a single ally in the room. I've always thought I could do it all on my own, that this was my burden to carry. But having you there, it felt like George was with me again." Her voice trembled slightly as she mentioned her husband's name, and she paused to steady herself. Ben looked down, feeling both humbled and overwhelmed by her words. He was just a janitor, a simple worker who'd kept to himself, maintaining his own quiet world within the bakery's walls. Yet somehow, Eleanor had seen something in him that he'd never seen in himself. In that moment, he felt a wave of emotions, a mix of pride, gratitude, and a sense of purpose that he'd never thought possible. He cleared his throat softly, trying to find the right words. "Mrs. Stanton." "Eleanor," he corrected himself, meeting her gaze with a sincerity that reflected his own deep respect for her. "I've always admired what you've done here, the way you've kept this place alive, not just as a business, but as a piece of all of us, I guess. It's more than just a bakery. It's a place where people come to feel like they belong." Eleanor's face softened even more, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're right, Ben," she said quietly. "This place, it's always been home to me, especially since George passed." She paused, as if gathering her thoughts, and then continued. "You know, sometimes I wonder if I've been so focused on holding on to his memory that I forgot to let others in, to allow anyone to share in what we built." She shook her head gently, a wistful smile touching her lips. "But today, you reminded me that I'm not alone. I needed that more than I realized." Ben's chest tightened with emotion as he absorbed her words. He had always felt like a silent observer in the lives of others, never truly a part of their stories. But today, something had shifted. He had been more than a bystander. He had become part of something larger, something meaningful. And in that quiet, shared moment with Eleanor, he realized he had finally found a place where he truly belonged. As they sat there, a comfortable silence fell between them. Finally, Eleanor spoke again, her voice gentle but filled with determination. "Ben, I want you to know that from this day forward, you're not just a janitor here. You're part of this place, part of what makes it special." She reached across the table, her hand resting on his in a gesture of deep respect. "You've shown me today that Silver Leaf isn't just mine to protect, it's ours, and I'd be honored if you'd walk this journey with me." Ben swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten as he fought back tears. The weight of her words, the kindness and sincerity in her gaze, touched him in a way he hadn't felt in years. He'd spent so long feeling invisible, like he was just one of the many people who drifted through life without leaving a trace. But here was Eleanor, the respected owner of the bakery, telling him that he mattered, that he was part of her vision, her legacy. "Thank you, Eleanor," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. I never thought I'd mean something to someone like this. I don't have the words, but thank you. I won't let you down." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with understanding, and for a moment she simply nodded, as if words were unnecessary. In that simple exchange, something profound passed between them. A mutual recognition, a bond formed from shared purpose and trust. It was as if George's spirit lingered there with them, guiding them toward a new chapter for Silverleaf, one where they could honor the past while stepping boldly into the future. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Eleanor and Ben stood together, gazing out at the bakery's quiet charm. There, in the warm glow of the fading day, they felt a renewed sense of hope, a quiet certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And for the first time in a long time, both of them felt truly at peace. The next day dawned crisp and clear, with a soft morning light filtering through the bakery windows. The aroma of freshly baked bread and pastries filled the air as customers began trickling in, their familiar faces brightened by smiles and friendly greetings. But for Ben, everything felt different. For the first time, he didn't just feel like the janitor in the background. He felt like part of the bakery's heart and soul, as if each sweep of his broom and every quiet, careful task contributed to the warmth and life of the place. Eleanor, true to her promise, included Ben in the daily meetings, not as a silent observer, but as someone whose opinions mattered. She began discussing plans with him about potential new recipes, ideas for improving the customer experience, and even thoughts on community events to connect the bakery more deeply with Lakeshore. Ben's heart swelled with pride and excitement, and a newfound confidence sparked within him. Though he was humble by nature, he offered his thoughts carefully, knowing that Eleanor truly valued his insight. One afternoon, while restocking the shelves, Ben noticed a family hesitating at the bakery's entrance. A mother, father, and their young daughter, who clutched a small worn teddy bear. They looked unsure, as if they hadn't intended to stop by but were drawn in by the smell and the inviting atmosphere. Ben caught Eleanor's eye and nodded subtly toward the family. She approached them with her signature warmth, offering them a free sample of their signature honey rolls, and within minutes, the family was seated, laughing and savoring the treats. As Ben watched this scene, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He realized that moments like these were the true essence of Silverleaf Bakery. It wasn't just a business. It was a place of comfort, a small haven where people could pause and feel at home, if only for a moment. Ben's heart swelled with pride, knowing he was now part of what made that happen. Later that evening, after closing, Eleanor and Ben stood side by side, cleaning up the day's remnants. They worked in comfortable silence, each lost in their thoughts. Then, Eleanor turned to Ben with a gentle smile. "You know, George would have been so proud of you, Ben," she said softly. "He believed that people are what make a place special. You've shown me that more than anyone." Ben felt a lump rise in his throat, but he managed a quiet nod, moved by her words. In that simple exchange, he understood that he had found his purpose here at Silverleaf, that he was no longer just a worker, but an integral part of a legacy he had come to cherish. And as the last light faded outside, Ben felt something bloom within him: hope, belonging, and a quiet, unwavering sense that he was home. As days turned into weeks, the bakery continued to thrive. But it wasn't just the pastries or the cozy atmosphere that drew people in. It was the sense of community, the unspoken bond between Eleanor, Ben, and everyone who walked through those doors. Together, Eleanor and Ben infused every loaf of bread and every cup of coffee with kindness and sincerity, creating a space where people felt seen, valued, and welcomed. Ben had transformed, no longer the quiet figure sweeping in the shadows. He was now a cherished part of the Silverleaf story, a guardian of its spirit and a friend to its customers. And Eleanor, having found a new purpose, no longer carried her burdens alone. They had each found strength in one another, bound by trust, respect, and a shared love for the legacy they were building together. The bakery became a symbol in Lakeshore, a place not only for freshly baked goods, but for moments of joy, connection, and compassion. Customers left with more than just bread. They left with a reminder of life's small yet profound moments of kindness. If this story touched your heart, Join us by subscribing to our channel for more heartfelt tales like this. Let's share these beautiful values of kindness, belonging, and hope together. Don't forget to like, share, and spread the warmth. Because life's greatest treasures are often found in the simplest, most unexpected places.